forget to rate our show and subscribe.
Before we begin this podcast, if you or someone you know is in crisis or needs emotional support, there are tools that can help. So get yourself a pen and paper or open a note-taking app on your phone or computer. Feel free to pause this episode while you get yourself ready. The episode starts at 1 minute and 52 seconds. You can call Talk Suicide Canada at 1-833-456-4566. You can text 45645, which is coming in the fall of 2023. In Canada, you can also call 988, the Kids Help Phone at 1-800-668-6868. The Trans Lifeline in Canada is 1-877-330-6366. And in the United States, 1-877-565-8860, or call 911. You are not alone, and you do not have to be alone. I would like to honor and recognize the traditional and unceded territories of the Katzie, Kwantlen, and Semiahmoo nations on whose territory I live, work, and play. Welcome to We Are the ADHD Family podcast. This podcast is meant to chronicle our journey with ADHD, autism, and other discoveries along the way. I reach out to advocates, experts, individuals, and other families that want to raise their voices and empower those on their journey. My name is Mark Smeets, and I am passionate about removing barriers for others through creating connections and building on strengths and practical problem solving. I am married to Siobhan, a parent of 2 wonderful kids, and all of us have ADHD. I want you to feel like you have power and hope. And now, into the episode. One of the things that we love about Owen is how literal he is. There was a joke that we used to say to him that he would never understand. He does now, so he catches it. But we would tell him, "Hey Owen, can you hold your horses?" And then he'd go, "I don't have any horses, Dad." Now when we try to tell him this joke, he just catches us and he's like, "That doesn't work on me anymore." Owen, I want to ask you some questions about grade 2.
Okay.
When there was something that you didn't understand, did she take the time to teach you and try different ways of learning?
Maybe.
Is that because you say maybe because you don't remember?
Yep.
Okay. Mackenzie, I have questions about school for you in kindergarten. Are you ready? What did you like best about kindergarten?
Playing outside with the grade 1s.
Did your teacher figure out things that you liked? You're nodding your head, but are you saying yes?
Yes.
Yes. If there was something that you didn't understand, did she try and help you figure out different ways of learning it?
Yes.
And how did that make you feel?
Happy.
Did she ever try and make you learn something that ever made you uncomfortable?
No.
I wanted to start the episode with that little clip of Owen. I promise you that Owen remembers. He seems to be fixated on the bad experiences from grade 2 when I asked him this morning, and he also had a really long sleep, so maybe he just wasn't totally ready to dive in and be his chatty little self. One small thing to note is my special guest today was only his teacher for part of grade 2. She ended up having to leave to attend to family issues. When she left, it devastated O. It was almost like losing a limb. My wife and I had to forge a new relationship with a new teacher, and she was wonderful. We love her too. But O struggled in the class because it was rough. And he also struggled because, he's at a different development level than everybody else. And that makes it hard. But the impact that Melissa had on him was profound in that short period of time that they were together. And it's interesting because when you have a child that is autistic or has a disability, and they form a relationship with a teacher or an EA, losing that unexpected, continuous, and constant support person can be devastating. And I know that's one common problem I've heard of in schools up here. You also heard Mackenzie in that clip, and what you couldn't see was that she was answering every question with a shrug of her shoulders. So I had to try to have her use more words since obviously you can't see us, and you can't see how she's answering. Mackenzie also had multiple teachers for kindergarten at one point this year, and both of them were absolutely wonderful. They were open to hearing things, and they didn't throw things at me or run away from me if I had questions. So I will end by saying, please value your teachers, value the experience that they bring. They are here to help, and don't be afraid to be the one to forge that relationship and approach them first. If you're a teacher listening to this, thank you for caring. It makes a difference in our families. My guest on today's show is Melissa Madison. Melissa is an early learning teacher who specializes in both literacy and numeracy. She loves to dive into the science of reading and other research-based practices that best support all of her learners, but especially those with neurodivergent brains. She also serves as a member of the Surrey School District's Mentorship Advisory Team and is an active mentor with a focus on supporting and advocating for Surrey's early career teachers. Melissa is a dedicated and enthusiastic educational leader who has held many diverse roles in both the Surrey School District and the Greater Victoria School District. These various positions stretch more than 15 years' experience, has given her a unique lens which to evaluate the strengths and stretches of our public school system. She is also a proud mom to a larger-than-life 7.5-year-old daughter and full-heartedly embraces this title more than any other on her resume. And full disclosure, she doesn't know I'm going to say this.
Oh, no.
But she is also, or was also, Owen's grade 2 teacher. And she was one of the first that believed in my wife and I, gave us information that we didn't consider, and validated us. And we are forever grateful. Melissa, welcome to the Advocateurs.
I love it. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Same here. Let's give our audience the background for the episode. There was a thread on a Facebook group about teachers raising. How does a teacher raise a prospect of a child possibly having a possibility of a diagnosis? And there was plenty of teachers that weighed in and made a strong show of support, pointing out that they're not allowed to diagnose kids. But it really begged the question of what can parents do and or say, and what can teachers do and or say. So Melissa and I, we basically thought it would be a great conversation where we could give practical advice and tips on this process, lay out some realities for both parties as we sit here and try and help kids. So the overall goal of the episode is to give parents and teachers practical tips on how a conversation can be started if they suspect that their child or student may have a disability. That's it.
Oh.
So I wanted to take you back in time for a second. And what do you remember when myself, my wife, and I had our first parent-teacher conference with O, and what were your impressions of Siobhan and me when we started talking about things? Because what I remember was that you had asked us to have the meeting, and then we went there. But yeah, I was curious to know what your impressions were of how we handled things, because I know that for us, there was already so much on our minds. We didn't know. But what do you recall?
Honestly, I think I was really excited initially was kind of my first impression, because both you and Siobhan were advocates, and I could see that right away. You were knowledgeable. You were clearly very present in your parenting to be able to notice the things that you had already noticed about Owen. And so I remember thinking, okay, I've gauged this. I can sense the attitudes. I can sense the belief systems that are kind of within your family. And I felt really positive, because I went, this is a family who's going to listen. This is a family who understands what's happening and is just as curious as I am about some of the behaviors that we were seeing. And I remember when I was able to kind of give you examples of the way that Owen, the way his brain worked through communication, when he was trying to express his ideas and things like that. And I remember giving you examples how his mind worked like a mind map, and how he'd have these kind of main ideas, and they all web into each other. And from the outside, you could not see the webbing. So it looked very like all over the place, but all of it made so much sense to him communicating these things to us.
Yeah.
And I remember you were like, that's bang on. That's exactly it. And I remember just feeling, just excitement to know that I would be working with true partners in the hopes of supporting Owen best that we could, and kind of digging in a little bit deeper to what was going on neurologically for him.
Yeah. And it was funny because that mind mapping, I remember the mind mapping conversation. And even this morning, he's got a thing on his foot right now, and we've got different color band-aids. And yesterday he had a blue band-aid. This morning he chose yellow. And the reason that he chose it was because he wanted to have a green lightsaber. And because we've been watching Clone Wars, Star Wars, he's like, well, that's going to be this Jedi's lightsaber. And I'm like, how the hell is anybody supposed to know this stuff? And like, because red and yellow, because yellow and blue make green, Dad. I mean, don't you know this? and it's Yoda's lightsaber. Like, okay. And half the time this stuff comes right out of the blue, and you're just like, what?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So yeah, I remember being relieved as well. And even when we went home afterwards, it was like, I just looked at my wife, and Siobhan and I were just like, I feel relief because somebody actually gets it. And it was nice because your background allowed us to bounce off questions. And I think I remember saying, because I say it to a lot of people, is I need to ask you the wrong question. I just don't know if it's right now. And I'll just, if I'm asking it the wrong way, just tell me, or if I've offended, tell me. But, being able to have that safe person to bounce those things off of, and to have someone that sees what you see, was incredibly validating. It really was. So yeah, it was nice because the timing couldn't have been any better, I think.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I would agree. And I experienced that relief as well. That's a perfect word for it.
Yeah.
Because I think, over my career, you don't always have meetings that go like that. And, teachers have to work so diligently on building tact and gentleness in their communication, right? Because we naturally want to protect our kids, and we can be defensive, and we can, denial is a very comfy place to live, I think, a lot of the time, right?
Yeah.
We, as humans, we don't like being uncomfortable, right? So yeah, having your openness and all of that. And I always kind of, my philosophy, because I've taught K through 5 in terms of investment in those grades over years. And when I switched from kindergarten to grade 2, my internal motto was the idea that no one falls through the cracks after me. Like, I'm their last catch before the fall.
I think I remember you saying this to us.
Mm-hmm. And it's so important, because I think a lot of the time, when kids enter kindergarten, we give them so much grace, right?
Yeah.
And as we should, right? Kindergarten is a huge undertaking for a 4 or 5-year-old, right?
Yeah.
And development is different for every child, and so there's a lot of grace in kindergarten that we extend to our learners, because there's so much going on for them. So when we notice these behaviors, we may or may not bring it up to parents, but it usually ends up being like, well, let's give them another year.
But it's interesting, because the two questions I have, I wrote down the first one because I'll come back to it. But you're talking about that grace, and I've seen, I mean, at our school, and actually not just our school, I've seen it in a bunch of schools where teachers and administrators will basically say, I get that kindergarten's a tough year. That makes sense. But I think with us, we and our parents like us, or families like us, there might be a little bit of an exception to the rule of, there are things that we were seeing that we've just seen since birth. And we're just like, no, I don't want to I don't want to see the grace side of things. I want, there is something there.
Yeah.
And I remember we talked about dyslexia. And it was just like, if we had gone back and if we could go back in time and sort of pick that out of kindergarten, we could have said, there might have been something. I don't know if it would have started a different ball rolling, but I think for the most part that was sort of just kind of missed because it wasn't fully on the radar, but it was like just off, not like just off, just before the peripheral ends, just there. But the fact that I really love how you said, no one falls through the cracks after me. I think it's a big deal because sometimes you just need to get that ball rolling and you need to sort of put that foot down and say, look, there is something more here. It may not necessarily change. Here's the other question I was going to ask you. Did I ever come across, Siobhan's a bit different because I'm the extrovert and I'm both. I'm far more loud than my wife. But did I ever come across as pushy, or maybe pushy is the word, or did I become that not I don't want to say that parent because I take that as a compliment. And I know I can be that parent.
We can all be that parent.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it should be a good thing.
Yeah.
But was there I guess what I'm saying is there a line where do you ever felt like I ever crossed a line in terms of being overly pushy or something else?
Never. I honestly, and not just because, we have a positive relationship.
Yeah.
But I would just say that you were just so engaged, and there is no fault in engaged parents, right? And
Yeah.
so for me, I would rather have parents that are engaged and wanting to meet and wanting to talk at dismissal and wanting to have conversations than parents who sit on the sideline and wait to be contacted if there's a problem.
Yeah.
I would much rather a proactive approach. And so no, I don't see it as pushy. And I think too that you tread a beautiful line between advocacy and also respect,
Yeah,
right? So
I try.
I never felt like I was in a position where I needed to defend my knowledge or that my observations were unfounded in some
Yeah.
way. And so I think because that was established, there was no way for me to fairly view you as being pushy or being quote that parent.
Yeah.
For me, it was like, oh great, Mark's here. I can tell him about this amazing thing that Owen said today. Or great, I saw this really interesting thing happen during play today, and I want to share that with him.
Yeah.
So knowing that that was established early on was so key for us, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I do try to walk that line very, very, very respectfully and very carefully because I don't necessarily know what the other person's gone through or what what's the word? What their lived experience is. And I was just figuring things out back then too. And that was about as I don't know. I was gonna say that was about as your emotions on your sleeve kind of moment as you could. But I just remember just being very excited that that we had someone that we could sit there and bounce this stuff off of because I know it's tough for me to find someone that can reciprocate that amount of energy and that amount of knowledge back to me the way that I do for them. And that can be overwhelming for people. It can be, it can turn people off. Just sometimes the amount of over energy you bring to something because you want to sit there and see that change. It's like, okay, you have to figure out how to sort of dial it back and then, when to dial it up at the right times. And that's not easy. It's hard. No, it's hard.
It takes a lot of practice, right? And different personalities. And I mean, you're not guaranteed someone every year that's going to have the same energy levels as you, or someone who, is interested in the same things that you are. regarding your child and things like that, right? So I think there is a certain amount of luck that does go with the
Yeah,
parent-teacher relationship.
100%.
It's no different than when we work in an office, or I work in a school. There's teachers that I absolutely jive with, that I'm like, hey, this is kindred spirit,
Yeah.
awesome. And then I go, okay, and you know what? This person's, their methodology is very different than mine. Their pedagogy around certain things is different than mine. That's okay. I respect them, but that's not someone I'm necessarily going to dive deep into a conversation with regarding our differences in pedagogy,
Yeah.
right? So I think
Yeah.
that there's, we're everywhere. We always are constantly dealing with people that maybe we don't jive with as well, and then people that we do. And so I think to be able to just hold gratitude for when you do have those moments where you connect with someone, and and it benefits the children.
Well, and something interesting that you said is that I think it's um, the way that a teacher is trained, I guess, and depending on what school that teacher may have gone to, that might have instilled them with specific values. And if they don't have necessarily the lived experience, that may very well create a big, huge set of blind spots. And oh, they're dyslexic, no big deal. Well, no, actually, it is a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just gloss or pass something over like that,
Yeah.
uh, let alone with any of the other disabilities. But I like how you phrased it like that, because I think it's a good thing. There's a practical tip right there. And I know I wrote that in my notes to you. It's knowing just what the background of somebody is, and maybe, granted, we don't know always where, what the training is like that you receive, but having a sense of what that background may be, because part of I know part of your background was autism as well. Like, that made a difference because we could sit there and say, I could push that question onto you, and it was a safe way for me to do it. Whereas someone that doesn't sort of have it, I think it's a bit harder to sit there and do, and then you have to hope that you guys can have that conversation. How important is it, in your opinion, for parents to ask, what background a teacher has outside of education or part of it?
So I think that, we have to be careful, when we do this, because I feel like teaching is one of the few careers where our expertise is um, used against us in some way. Like I have that an example, like, do you ask your dentist what additional training they have when they're discussing an obvious cavity in your mouth, right? It's something to think about. Do you sure, you might go to a doctor and get a second opinion from another doctor, but rarely are you going, this expert is wrong in what they're saying, right? You
Yeah,
usually accept what they have to say, and if you want a second opinion, obviously go ahead, and that's totally fine. But for whatever reason, teachers are not extended that same respect. We go through a tremendous amount of education to become teachers. We have degrees. Many teachers have multiple degrees. Many have master's degrees, like, extra certificate programs and things under their belts um, that just don't seem to be important to the general public.
yeah.
Our degree hanging on the wall doesn't hold the same merit as a doctor's degree hanging on the wall. And so, is it important to know what the background is of a teacher? Sure, depending on how you use it. If you use it to not validate what the teacher is saying, then that obviously is problematic. But if you're using it just out of curiosity, like, okay, oh wow, there's a huge connection point, because let's say this teacher also has a child with autism at home. Okay, well, now we're connecting on a parent to parent level instead of just teacher to parent level, right? So these things are helpful. But I mean, ultimately, we need to understand that teachers are educated human beings in a profession, and that we, just like every other human, we have our own set of strengths and interests on top of those foundational skills that come out of university coursework, right? And
Yeah.
our practicums and things like that. So, as part of our teacher mandate, we have to participate in constantly evolving professional development. But we hold the autonomy to be able to choose what that professional development actually is.
Yeah.
So if someone has an affinity towards neurodivergent children and learning about dyslexia, then they can take Pro D on that. And that's awesome. So now they've got a bolstered understanding of an interest topic that then serves you particularly. But what if I wasn't super interested in that? I felt like I had enough of a grasp of all of that from my coursework in
Mm.
university, but I was super interested in inquiry and how inquiry can enhance, the educational experience for kids. Though that
And
might not directly serve you in the conversation about your child's neurodivergence, but that's what I'm interested in, and that will help other children who thrive in an inquiry-based program, right? So I think we have to be, just mindful not to use a teacher's background or areas of interest against them as a way to demerit
mm,
their observations and things like that. But if we're using it as a way to connect or just gain background information about the person we're having a conversation with,
yeah.
then that's super fair.
Well, and just to back up just a tiny bit, the one term you were saying when you said Pro D, you meant like I know you meant
Right.
professional development days.
Yes.
We just know them as Pro D days.
Hmm.
And in many of the school districts, you can choose to do certain what's the word? You can choose to do certain courses and such that the school district may put together a special guest speaker, and you can go attend and learn more. And that's what the Pro D. I think Pro Ds are absolutely awesome for that stuff. They're really good, and I know in Surrey's case, just some of the people that they've had through are just fantastic. So
Mhm.
I'm a big believer in it. What the the thing that I thought about when you were telling me this was, if the teacher doesn't have the background, then, or whether they do or do not, it might be irrelevant. It might be a case of just kind of recognizing what role maybe a teacher wants to play as well.
Mhm.
And if the teacher doesn't, let's say, they don't have a background in anything neurodiverse related, well, maybe they have to connect with the with LST. And I
Mhm.
totally forgot what LST's what it meant.
Learning support
Learning
teacher.
support teacher.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just
And then
blanked
there's
out on my own brain there.
no, that's
But
okay. And then we have IST as well, which is integration support teacher.
yeah,
Mhm.
and I think maybe connecting, making a point of connecting with those or having that person, because I know the ones for our schools, I think they have reached out to parents probably before and they've acted as that intermediary. So it's a nice little way to have that. It's again, it's not using the education or your experience against you. It's just a way of saying, you know what, I think there's somebody else that might be able to help you better than this. And
Absolutely.
that's probably a good idea. And I mean, you can even go through probably the principal on that one too, I think, or the VP if you've got
Mhm.
a VP,
And
if you've
and
got a
I
vice principal in your school.
Absolutely. I think too that, the wonderful thing about school systems in general is that if you're not an expert in something, there is someone who is, and we have access to those people. Whether it's, district staff and helping teachers to have expertise in certain areas, whether it's your principal who's been teaching for so long before they became administration, whether it's the teacher next door who has a passion for X, Y, or Z, right? So there's always an expert available. And so if a classroom teacher doesn't necessarily know enough about something yet to offer solid advice or answers that you might be looking for, as long as that teacher remains curious and open to finding out and exploring more about those things to serve you and to serve the learner in their class, then I don't think the background matters so much, right? Like
Yeah.
I think about like even just myself as a parent, right? Did I know how to care for a newborn when my daughter was born?
Yeah.
No, I learned on the way, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
we're constantly evolving as parents, as humans, as professionals, and so, um, knowing what I know now, even about my own daughter, or about students that I teach year to year, that didn't just happen overnight the
No.
minute I hung up my, Bachelor of Education degree, right? That
Yeah.
that came from further curiosities, from student situations that I faced for the first time that I needed to explore more about, right? So
Yeah.
doing our own research, looking into things, talking to the experts, all of that is a part of the process too, right? So um, we can't say, oh, because you don't know about that, your opinion isn't valid here.
Yeah.
um, it's as long as the teacher is open to
Well,
exploring, to hearing more.
this is where I think as a parent, if if someone isn't sure what to do, if or a teacher isn't necessarily sure what to do, and I think there are times when it's valid to say, if I was a teacher, I don't know. As a parent, it's like, okay, who can I talk to next? Where can I go next? And I mean, sure, you could always set a little default process in your brain to, talk to the principal, but it might be worth finding out who the other roles in the schools are and being aware of what they are.
Mm.
And I mean, just like you said, there's no manual for being a parent. There's no the there's no manual for a lot of things that we have to do, and which is I just find really funny. It's all how we sort of come up with this on the fly and who
Yep.
we are. It ties into our personalities a lot of the time. So, there's nothing to stop a parent from, I guess, asking those other questions and from asking those other questions and staying curious as well. Don't I think my advice for any parent would be don't give up after if something isn't quite working out, don't give up. Far from it.
Mm.
Go and find out, what can I do next? This avenue didn't work. Okay, but what are the questions I'm left with and what are the answers that I'm seeking, even if you don't agree with the answer that you just got?
For sure.
And I know with us that was like after you went, you had your family stuff that happened and you had left partway through the year, and we had the new teacher, who I loved. We thought she was fantastic.
Mm.
Um, what was great is that she was willing to listen, and
Yes.
we were trying to help her with everything that we had seen,
Mm.
and she was trying to do the same thing, feeding the information back to us because we were concerned. And Owen did have such a rough grade too. And I remember back before the school year started, and I wrote this email to you, and I was not expecting to write it, but it was the weirdest experience of saying, here are all the things that you should be watching out for as that. And I remember giving it to her. I want to say her name. God knows I desperately do, but I haven't talked to her, so I'm just not gonna. I just don't want to put her in that situation because she hasn't proved it. But she's awesome. I loved her.
Mhm.
I love her. I think she's great, and just the fact that she was open to sit there and talk with us, great. Let's do it. Let's take care of that.
Yeah.
Um, I think one thing we can definitely say, and it was funny because this is really the first thing I wrote down because I was going to establish it off the bat, but my sense is that some parents have an expectation or think that the teacher can diagnose a student, but that is flat out not the case at all.
Yeah.
Define the role of a teacher.
That's a really big question. And I think that, so, I mean, I can get philosophical about pretty much anything. um, but when we say the role of a teacher, there's definitely a difference between what I think you're asking versus how I interpret it. So, what I think you're asking is more of what's our responsibility, the job description kind of
Yeah.
thing. And so, if we look at it from a super simplistic point of view, while we plan and prepare lessons, we are constantly researching and developing new teaching materials, new methodologies, new strategies for things. We're always assessing, evaluating, we're reporting, we're communicating. We have administrative duties like photocopying, phone calls, outside agency reports, staff meetings, all of that stuff, right? So when I look at that, I go, okay, well, that's what a teacher does. But very rarely are teachers just what they do. Teachers become who they are, or being a teacher becomes a part of the soul of most educators. And so there's an interesting I think it's Latin, and it's an educational law, and it's called in loco parentis. And so it's what it means that it's in educational law. It's under our teacher standards when we get our teaching certificate and all of that. We have to actually sign that loco parentis means in place of a parent. And so how it's defined is that the teacher stands in a position of a caring, responsible parent and unofficial guardian. So imagine the role of having loco parentis as your foundational, stance moving into the classroom, that we have to sign and say, yes, this is a part of being in the role of a teacher. And we have to make decisions every single day with that mind frame. So, when you think of it from a role base as opposed to a responsibility or a job description, we are constantly fostering students' positive identities, their mental and physical well-being. We have to keep them safe. We're helping them build their social and personal responsibilities, their intellectual development. We have to keep everyone super safe, both physically and emotionally. We are held accountable on and off duty for how we interact with the world, how we interact with parents. Very rarely in other professions, if someone is drinking at a pub, let's say, are they held accountable for what they're doing on their off hours? Whereas if a teacher is at a pub and becomes unruly, that can negatively impact the profession as a whole, and we can be disciplined for that. So it's interesting how that kind of how that affects teachers and how they embrace their roles. So, I know your question seems simple, but
It's not. No.
I mean, really, and with everyone's different personalities and their dedication to their profession and all of that, right? You're going to have teachers who just simply do their job description, and then you're going to have others who fully embrace the role and that idea of loco parentis, and really take it seriously. The well-being of the children in their care, because it extends so much further than just planning and delivering lessons every day, right?
Well, and
So
at the same time too, I know I was shocked when I heard this one when I did my when I got my first aid, and I remember telling people that I had it. What I found out was that, if you've got first aid in a school, the first aid is actually only there for staff. It's not there for students. You go see maybe the principal or something like that. But a lot of really what's the word I'm trying to say? The role of that first aid person is only to look after staff, not students. And that was a shock to me. And it still sort of is.
mhm.
But, then again, kids go to the offices to get Band-Aids and stuff. And I mean, you do get serious injuries that happen at school.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, we've all seen our fair share of that. But, I think that line gets blurred.
Hmm.
And I think that's where, I think the same thing happens with the job description side of things versus what kind of happens in reality.
Hmm.
Right? Like that,
Oh
like you've got that meme, reality versus
yeah.
expectation.
Hmm. Yep, absolutely. And it's interesting. I feel like um, teachers walk a very interesting line in terms of what their role really means. So bear with me, this thought's downloading as I'm trying to articulate it. Um, so, parents and, society as a whole, they expect teachers to be experts. They expect teachers to know what they're doing, obviously. We're sending our most prized possessions to these people every day, right?
Yeah.
Most teachers spend more time with your children in a week than you do, right? These things happen all the time. And so um, there's this expectation that we are this on a pedestal in terms of being held to ethical and accountable behaviors in and off, on and off duty, um, and that we're supposed to know it all, so to speak, right? And know where to guide and know where to help and know what to do and all these things. And yet at the same time we are doubted and
Yeah.
we are crucified time and time and time again by parents and society as a whole, right? And it's funny, like I think back to COVID, for instance, when all of that went down in 2020 and that initial shift happened to online learning and learning from a distance and whatever other coin phrase we used in that time. And it was interesting how quickly, when parents were handed the responsibility of doing a teacher's job, quote unquote,
Mm.
at home while trying to balance everything else in their lives, we became angels. Everyone was, I don't know how you do it. Oh my gosh, this is like, you're amazing. I just tried to do a math lesson with my own kid and I'm ready to quit life. You know what I mean? So
Yep.
we got that like crazy, right? And that
Yeah.
was one parent with one child trying to manage that. And teachers are doing this every single day with 20 plus kids,
Yeah.
various needs, learning styles, etc. But then when we advocated for our own safety, when they wanted us to return in person,
Mm.
how quickly the dime flipped
Yeah.
and how quickly teachers were being called names, in terms of being, lazy, not wanting to go back into work, well, as if it was some vacation, some holiday for us to completely change everything about the way our education system worked on a dime, like that, right? So I think that whole idea of how we treat teachers and the way that we hold them up but also tear them down on the same drive, it's crazy and it's hard to navigate, but that's a rabbit hole, so
Well, but I find it interesting because it sort of leads to something that I know I think about quite a bit is that as growing up with or raising Owen how we have and even Mackenzie as well, the hardest part for us was because like a lot of people would tell us, take him to speech, right? Because it can be hard to understand him.
Mhm.
And we did that, but then the speech pathologist would come back and here's the homework to do and here's to look for this stuff. And I'm like, what? I have to learn how to do this? I don't like I out of all the things that I've learned in these 9 years, speech still is like it is my weakest thing more than anything else.
Sure.
And it's not just, read up a flashcard and say the words, it's how you're saying that word, what part of the tongue are you using? Like it just goes straight over my, the lack of hair on my head. And I think when the pandemic, kicked in, I find it interesting because I remember saying to, I think it wasn't Siobhan, it was somebody else, that why do I feel like I am like you go to work, you come back, and now you're sitting there trying to work through therapies or what have you with your kid, and you're exhausted, and now you have to sit there and go, are they pronouncing the word right?
Mhm.
I don't know, like
Yeah.
it's you yeah, I'd love to say optimistically that, we're up for the challenge, but after a long day's work, that's hard. And that feeling and it's not that you can go do speech every day. You can't do that. But just having that added responsibility for a parent to go on there, and with a parent that has no background or may not even have any interest in it. I mean, that's a whole other issue, but
Yeah.
that is a heck of a lot of pressure,
Oh yeah.
for a parent to go through, and to see what it was sort of like during the pandemic. I think there are parents that are already out there, ourselves included, where they're just like, yeah, parents have been doing this for a while, and just because our kids have a disability, but other ones that don't have that, and they're trying to learn and trying to see it from a child's point of view of how they're trying to learn something.
Mhm.
whole other that's a whole other thing. They're starting from scratch. They don't have the parents, a lot of them don't have the tools, and they don't have the skills, and probably don't have the patience either.
Mhm.
Some will be able to step up and figure things out, and they'll want to see from the child's point of view what's going on, which is a whole other issue I have within education itself. But the idea that um, you can't just teach something at somebody. It's really, you want to teach them in the way that they understand it. And that is, there's a difference between, teachers, that are in that camp versus the ones that are just trying to teach something at somebody. And it's like, what, you don't understand what this means? Well, again, the example I use, and I actually think it was you that, no, it might not have been you, but I used it with somebody. But I say this example a lot, which is, how many ways can you figure out how to write the word, horse? You could use it with a pen, you could use blocks, you could write it out with Smarties or M&Ms or chocolate bars. Um, you could use a computer, you could use an iPad, you could use text to speech, and you're all going to end up in the same result. Well, then why, again, for students in general, or the school system rather, why are we focusing so hard on having to write something out as opposed to finding a different way that gets the result?
Mhm.
Which is that in itself is a very big shortcoming. And one that I find myself talking more and more people with, and trying to say, you know, Owen thinks like this. This is how it relates to him.
Mhm.
Your other way is not going to work.
Mhm.
Just won't.
Well, I think too that like thinking back to teaching Owen, and I remember, thinking I needed, we were wrapping up a particular science unit, and I was trying to do a final assessment to understand, what pieces he understood, and where his stretches still were. And most of my students, they took this assessment, and no problem. And I had Owen come with me at a totally different time of the day and sit with me one on one. And I asked him the questions. And if he needed clarification about what the question was asking or needed a visual, I gave that to him.
Yeah.
And then I wrote his answers in quotation marks, because I went, am I trying to assess his ability to print, or am I trying to assess what he understands about this science topic? And so I think being able to pick out the pieces and go, okay, what am I actually trying to assess? What is important for him to understand? And how can he show me what he understands?
Yeah.
Um, because I think if we keep everybody in this tight box of performance standards, then we're missing out on other ways of understanding and other ways of showing,
Yeah.
right? And I remember, I think, and I'm pretty sure it was a conversation that we had where where I was getting a lot of feedback from other teachers, about scribing, for Owen at that time. and writing out his answers for certain things, or having him orally tell me a story, and I would put it on the word processing.
And we should say when scribing is when somebody writes
Writes
something
for
out
you.
for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different, ways to scribe. You can just do it very simply where you're listening and you're just writing what they're saying, or you can do scribing where you would write down what they say, let's say with like a highlighter, and then the child goes over the letters with a pencil. So they're writing it, but they're just tracing, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But that's a different thing. But there was a difference in opinion about what was effective. And I just remember a conversation with you where I was like, okay, when we still didn't know that dyslexia was a for sure thing, and we weren't totally sure what was happening there. And we
Mhm.
also still didn't have the ASD diagnosis. So all I had to go off was ADHD, and some sensory stuff. And so it was like, okay, we have to figure this out. And I remember if he would tell me a story and I would write it out for him on paper,
Mhm.
he was unable to copy it into his own journal. But if
Yeah.
I wrote it on word processing and it was digital, he could see the letters more clearly and he could copy it down into his book. So when I'm evaluating that, I go, okay, so looking at what's important for him to know by the end of grade two,
Yeah.
sure, we want him to be able to print, we want him to be able to spell, we want him to have a really solid, phonetic understanding of the alphabetic code, and we want all these things for him. But
Mhm.
if there's these barriers neurologically for him, how can he show up in a way that is strengths based for him
Yeah.
and builds confidence in his ability? So I go, okay, I'm going to listen to the story that he's going to tell me. He's going to understand the criteria that I'm looking for. It needs to have, beginning, middle, end. It needs to have at least one character, whatever I would set as the criteria for him to meet. And then I listen and I assess accordingly. Do I need that story written in his journal to be able to assess whether or not he can formulate a story with a beginning, middle, end, and one character in it? No. So being able to open up how children show what they know
Yeah.
is so important, and really helps them build that confidence and moves them forward in a way that is important. So then when later on when he did get those additional diagnosis and things like that, it was like, okay, well, this makes sense, and this is why these strategies worked
Yeah.
for helping him along in his literacy and things like that. So yeah, so just being open to that, and how we let learners show up, um, and not keeping it in this narrow, well, this is what the performance needs to be only, right? It's what else can we do?
How do you how do you approach parents when you have a concern? Do you have a process that you follow? Is it
Um,
like for me, you know me well, and you know me well enough now, but
mhm,
the I mean, for me, for the most part, I sort of work out a lot of the processes and what I'm going to say in my head ahead of
mhm,
time. So I sort of keep the points down, or I've written all the notes down on my phone because I'm not going to remember. I'm going to forget.
mhm,
Go ADHD, and I will try and make it mechanical, as less emotional as I possibly can. But what do you how do you approach it with a parent or
mhm,
parents?
mhm. So I think the way that I start any conversation with a parent is always going to use a strengths based approach. Um, Always. So starting, what do I mean by that? So it's, what can this child do well? What what do they offer in our class that brings joy and light? How can I communicate how special this child is, first, before I go, have you noticed this? Or here's what I've seen, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that. So always kind of, because I don't want to say like buttering the parent up, because it isn't that. It's about validating the gifts
Yeah.
that child brings first. Because they're a whole child. They're not just their deficits or their stretches, right?
Yeah.
They're a whole child. So being able to start a conversation where I'm like, okay, I love having so and so in my class. So and so is such a great friend, and I love that they're always so caring and compassionate. They're always so excited to put their hand up when we're having a class discussion, whatever it is, right?
Hmm.
And filling that bucket first, because parents want to know that their children are a gift, right? They want to hear that from the person spending so much time with their child, right?
Yeah.
So my process is always beginning with strengths first, always.
Yeah.
And so then I really just try and take a listening stance in those first few meetings, because I'm trying to find out more about that child. I have some observations that I've been able to make. I'm noticing some certain things. I've been, note taking during the day, whatever I've done to collect my own data and my own questions about a child. But taking a listening stance is kind of the next thing. So after I kind of pour into the parent and let them know that their child is amazing, then I go, okay, tell me more about, what does your child do after school? Walk me through a
Yeah.
day after school. What do you guys like to do on weekends? Does so and so play any sports or do any, activities, extracurriculars? What do they love to do? Do they get along with siblings? Do they have pets? So I'm trying to find out basically what exists in that child's life backpack. The
Hmm.
backpack that they are bringing metaphorically to school every single day, right? So for some kids, their backpacks are full of trauma, right? Their backpacks are full of a really ugly history of awful things that have happened to them.
Yeah.
But then there's some that come with backpacks that are fairly light and full, have a soccer ball in it, and they're like, okay, I'm ready to rock, right?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to find out context. Context is everything. So taking that listening stance where you're just opening up the conversation allows there to be an ease in conversation, so that a parent, because like no parent wants to go and necessarily sit in, and meet with the teacher. I don't know if it's just that it's this conditioning that we have where we think we're in trouble when we're sitting down with a teacher or a
Yeah.
principal.
Yep.
But
Yep.
you want to even the playing field, that there isn't this like hierarchy, that we're here and we're together and we're a team on the same playing field,
Yeah.
and we're all going for that same goal, right? So I would say, kind of, once I've established that rapport, I've taken a listening stance and kind of built a bit of a context around that child. Then I'm kind of able to say, here are some things that I'm noticing. Tell me more about that. Or, you know, it was really interesting. I was doing this, and then I'll tell kind of a scenario or a situation involving their child. And then I leave it to them, right? Like I pose that back and go, like, tell me your thoughts about that,
Yeah.
as opposed to going, here's what I think based on this scenario. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Right?
And
So
I
it's
mean,
keeping that dialogue open.
well, and it's keeping the dialogue open, and this is not about a diagnosis, right?
Mhm,
This is about, are we really, what I gather from all this, and I think that's what the three of us did, my wife, you, and I,
mhm, mhm,
is that you have this. Um, it isn't so much about. I mean, I know I was sitting there thinking diagnosis, because it
mhm,
was just in my brain. But you're trying to validate what you're seeing is the same thing that they're seeing as
mhm,
well. Where's the, like, is there a consistency? Is it not consistent? And even if something wasn't consistent at home, that's actually perfectly fine, because
mhm.
the way that children mask, right? When we sit there and hear about,
Oh, yeah.
they're perfectly fine at school, but when they get home, they completely unleash. Makes perfect sense in the world of neurodiversity. It makes perfect sense for us.
Mhm,
Um, the but to me, it just sounds like you're looking for that reciprocation back of, oh, okay, this is what they're seeing too, and this is what I'm seeing,
mhm,
and just talking openly out loud about all the things. And I like how you were saying, you're not trying to butter up the parent.
Mhm.
I think part of the problem is that because of the way the grade system, I think, exists when you've got A's and B's and C's, and I mean, having an A means absolutely nothing. It means you probably had the luxury of memorizing half the answers, and some kids can just do that, and doesn't necessarily represent an understanding of the material.
Mhm.
Some people will. Some people have that understanding. They can get that A, and that's fine.
Mhm.
But for some other kids, a lot of them, it's not going to be that. I know this sure wasn't for me,
Mhm.
but you're you're pointing out the strengths because, again, like we were just saying a few minutes ago, there isn't a way, right? There isn't a correct way to arrive at a conclusion. There
Mhm.
is more than one way to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's super important to sort of keep in mind. The other struggle I think a lot of parents have, I know we did and we still do, is just understanding a report card, what's actually required
Mhm.
for the grade. We don't, I think, as a parent, you know, if you had I mean, you already know, you've kind of got the inside on that side of it because you've had your training. But when I look at myself, it's like I don't fully understand a report card.
Mhm.
It's if you tell me something specific, sure, I'll be able to sit there and understand that. Last week or the week before, British Columbia just moved to the proficiency system, and a bunch of schools had been using this already for past, what
Mhm.
has it been, 5 years, I think, anyways.
Well, and we use the proficiency scale up until grade 4 is when they switch to letter grades.
Yeah.
So the proficiency scales we've always used K to 3.
Yeah, it's a way better way to do and I guess they're extending it now to grade 9, I think it
Mhm.
was,
Yeah,
which I
yeah.
think is great, like, fantastic. You wanna understand, like, the mechanisms that pull because you wanna be able to figure out, and maybe this is not what the intention of it is, but this is just where my brain goes. I sit there and say, again, if I know a child learns by using only green stickers and this whole class is using red stickers,
Mhm.
oh, my child's gonna have an issue, right?
Mhm.
We have to find a way to get them to use the green stickers.
Yeah.
That's where I think um, a lot of the questions need to be asked, at least from the parent point of view.
Mhm. Well, I think with that, by using that strengths-based approach too,
Mm,
um, it kind of helps us be detectives, right?
yeah,
So we can go, okay, so if I know what incentivizes the child, I know what they're interested in, I can use that as a way to connect with them. I can, if I, like your sticker example, if I know that so and so can write me 5 pages of a story if they're using yellow paper with red
yep,
margins, while the rest of them can do it with white paper and pink margins, then I'm going to provide yellow paper with red margins,
yeah,
right? Like,
exactly. Yeah,
so it's about being a detective together and understanding that when you are hearing feedback from a teacher that there's validity to it, right? So
yeah,
our experience with your child is still valid, whether you agree with what we're saying or not, whether you see it at home or not. There is validity to what we are seeing as professionals,
yeah,
right? And so that it could be there's a million reasons why you might not see that at home or why you might disagree with what I'm saying. That's okay because your lived experience is different than my lived experience with your child.
yeah,
And so being able to find that middle ground where you go, okay, so here's what you're seeing, here's what you're seeing. So this is what we know.
yeah,
What are we going to do moving forward? And so being able to use those differences as the key to moving forward, as opposed to going, okay, well, I'm getting nowhere with this parent or I'm getting nowhere with this teacher because they're not seeing what I'm seeing. So therefore, I guess we'll just leave it. Well,
yeah,
no, we're not leaving it. It's going, why are there differences? Oh, is it because there's, there's something going on at home for that child, there's been a divorce or someone just passed away, or there's a competition that weekend that they're super anxious for, so their behavior's been off, or do you know what I mean? Like there's
yeah,
always those antecedents, those things that are behind our behaviors.
yeah,
And so if we're noticing these behaviors at home or we're not noticing them at school or whatever, that's a point of discussion. That's not the point where that's not a period going, okay, well, this conversation's over because we disagree.
Yeah.
It's okay, why are we disagreeing and what's going on behind that?
Well, and that sort of leads me to another thought too, which was, how can I as a parent listen to the concerns of a teacher? I was going to say effectively, but maybe that's just the wrong word, but just listen in general, even though I may not agree with what I'm hearing, like what's
Mhm.
an effective way to absorb those things?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of like I said. So, your agreement to what a teacher is sharing doesn't negate the validity of what the teacher is sharing, right? So,
Yeah.
it's not a you're wrong, I'm right mentality. It's in this environment, these behaviors are happening. And in this environment, these behaviors are happening.
Yeah.
So, what are we going to do about it, right? So, I think that the first and thing to do is to breathe and to maintain an open posture to hearing about things that are going on for your child. But I mean, in terms of like practical tips, so first, a parent has to regulate themselves.
Mm.
Before they can do any work with their child, they have to regulate themselves. So, if you leave a conversation with a teacher and you're angry or you're frustrated or you're disappointed or you're confused,
Yeah.
you need to find a way to regulate those feelings first before you can do anything productive with what information's been given to you. So, whatever that looks like for you, if that looks like going for a run, if that looks like having a good cry, if that looks like phoning someone else and hashing it out, whatever, regulate yourself first. Then I would say that, that observation is key. So, taking some notes of your own at home. Go, okay, so I'm going to choose 30 minutes to watch my child play with their Lego. They're not
Mhm.
going to know that I'm watching from this particular lens, but I'm going to say, okay, just play. And so it's an unstructured play activity. It's not something you've set up with a certain,
Yeah.
routine already built in. So it's just unstructured play and just watch. Go, okay, so the teacher said um, that after about 3.5 minutes, my child has to stand up. Okay,
Mhm.
so that's the behavior you're going to focus on for that one unstructured play session. So take the notes. What do you wonder? What are you seeing? What's different? What's similar than what the teacher said? Let the data be your driver because it's hard to deny data when you're collecting it. So if you're choosing to focus on one or two specific behaviors that the teacher pointed out, um, and you are doing a tally mark every time you notice that behavior during an unstructured play session,
Mm.
you can't deny, oh my gosh, okay, wow. Yeah, Miss Madison mentioned that so and so after 3.5 minutes has to stand up, and that happened 6 times in a 30-minute period. Oh, interesting. How do you deny the tally marks and what you're observing, right? So
Yeah.
I think if you can remain open minded and take very specific behaviors to then observe, you'll start to notice things. And perhaps you don't notice the same behaviors, but you're still noticing behaviors. And what you observed during that time is still valid to your experience. And it's still important to share with the teacher and say, okay, I actually watched so and so play Lego for 30 minutes and he only got up once. Well, interesting. Was probably because it was a preferred activity, something that they wanted to do. Interesting. Now I want you to set up a toy that maybe he doesn't like so much and see
Yeah.
what happens. Do you know what I mean? So then
I do.
the information you've collected, that data you've collected, is still valid and can still help the detective process to building a case around your child.
I think that one of the missing steps is probably to acknowledge that you do feel attacked or that you do feel upset, uh,
Mm-hmm.
or something there. And I do this with kids a lot, let alone myself. Is I will say, there's three answers that are always valid. There's yes, no, and I don't know. And I don't know is a perfectly valid answer when you're not sure what the path you need to take is or what you're feeling. And I think people sort of get forced to make a determination right then and there, but it's perfectly within your right to say I have no idea at this point. And I may not be able to put that into words just yet, but there's an emotion in me where I feel upset or I feel attacked, if you can even name that feeling. Because some parents who are, some people who will be highly competitive will be like, what do you mean, little whatever is struggling? And they will feel offended and cast out, like they're the bane of society or something like that, and the world's going to end. And it's like, it ain't about you, actually. It's about your kid. And if you want them to be, that successful as the success level that you reached, well, you should take an interest in what it is. But I think stepping back and acknowledging your feelings first is a really big thing that you sort of want to do after you kind of bring yourself down and regulate, whether that's step 1 or step 2. I mean, whichever. But I think when you're doing the observation, like you were saying, you kind of do it with, once you acknowledge it, it's like, oh, you're kind of doing it with fresh eyes. What have I actually seen? Because not everybody will think like me or my wife or like you, right? That's yeah.
Absolutely. And I think too that like sometimes you might need to take a step back. And so you might need to ask someone you trust to make observations or to share their wonders about your child after spending time with them. So if you are lacking that rapport and that respect and that trusting relationship with the child's teacher, choose someone else that you already have that rapport with so
Yeah.
that you can try and mitigate those defensive or disillusioned feelings that you might have about your child, so that ultimately you can step out of the way. And
Yeah.
I say that with love. And I'm a parent too, and I have to step out of my child's way all the time.
Mhm.
And so, I think the easiest way that I try and, if I'm rubbing up against a parent team that maybe is not agreeing with what I have to say or is less open to trying strategies or things like that, the way I always try and frame it to a parent is I want you to imagine your child at their full potential. What does that look like? What needs to change or what needs to continue to keep them moving towards that potential? Because I think for a lot of kids, especially neurodivergent kids, whether they have a diagnosis or not yet, that there's a status quo acceptance. And
Mhm.
so as parents or as teachers will go, okay, well, they're doing okay. And we get okay with okay
Yeah.
being full potential. And that isn't it. And so we need to step out of the way and we need to say, okay, what can we actually shift so that my child's full potential is being seen and experienced by my child on the regular,
Yeah.
not my child had an exceptional day today and didn't hit anyone. Okay, well, they've met their full potential. Okay, well, how do we make that the norm
Yeah.
then? Right. So I think, a lot of parents, they get, upset and there's a defensiveness and a denial because that feels comfortable. It feels comfortable to stay there. We don't like the human nature doesn't like to be uncomfortable. And so and we don't like our children to be uncomfortable. So we often save our children or we, take the discomfort of things away when there's big feelings or behaviors, right?
Well,
So,
and not only that, I think the important thing to do, which is what, you know, the three of us did, I thought, fairly well, was you got to get the voice of the child in there.
yes.
And you have to say, you know, how does this make you feel? What are you, give them the opportunities to guide as much of the questions as or the answers to the questions that you're asking as you can about their experience of what makes it hard for them, because you don't want to be the parent that sort of goes home and just sort of dumps on the child and, you know oh, your teacher said you're struggling and this is hard, so if you want to talk, I'm here. Well,
Mhm.
no, ask more open-ended questions and try and start the conversation.
Yes.
and get the specifics, I think, is a
Absolutely. And
big
always
deal.
starting with that sentence stream of tell me more about,
Yeah.
right? What are
Yeah.
your thoughts about? Because if we leave that open, as opposed to, like you said, going in and being like, okay, Mr. So and so says that, you're not completing your work on time, or that, you're talking to your friends too much, or out of your seat too much, or
Mm.
whatever the behavior is. And then the child will automatically go into self preservation mode.
Yeah.
Right? This is what
Yeah.
they want to do. They don't want to disappoint. They might lie about it. They might deny it. There's all sorts of self-preservation coping strategies that children and adults have, right?
Yeah.
So if we can go in and be like, I had a meeting with Mr. and Mrs. So and so, and they were sharing, that they noticed that maybe you were a little bit off this morning. You want to tell me what was going on for you?
Yep.
What are your thoughts with that?
Yep.
Right. So leaving that openness there and getting the child involved and being like, hey,
Yeah.
what feels good for you when you are in morning meeting with Miss Madison? Do you like sitting in a chair instead of on the floor? Would that be better for your body, do you think? Like,
Yeah.
let's brainstorm some strategies. Like, when do you feel really good at school and when do you feel uncomfortable at school? And talk about that, right?
Yeah.
So getting the child involved, not necessarily saying, oh, well, we think that you might have autism,
Yeah.
or we think that,
Yeah.
you don't necessarily need to go that far, especially right
No.
away.
No.
But just trying to get the feedback of the child as well, right? Because
No, and
they're
I think
part of
and
the
I think something
equation.
like that is I mean, something like that, that just sort of jumps the gun entirely, right?
Mhm.
It's, all of a sudden you're thinking about this sort of diagnoses or something like that. Like, I remember, like, Owen really didn't know about autism until really the day before, we went over to Sunny Hill. The other thing was that he knew about his ADHD primarily because of me and the stuff that, like, he and I had seen, that I had seen, and I'm like, we share this, and it's, we share this sort of bond, but everything else before that, before even getting to that point, it talked about, especially the ADHD side, I will forget things if I don't write them down. Do you have that same issue?
Mhm.
And those, do you feel like you can organize yourself? Those are the things that brought us closer together, because he realized that he wasn't being attacked. He's like, Dad feels this way. I
Mhm.
feel this way. He's identifying with that. And we're not throwing a label on there. So it's much better. It's much easier to sit there and I think approach a subject like that, because it isn't about, as much as it is about the diagnosis, it isn't about the diagnosis.
It's
So
about validating and normalizing the experience.
yeah, yeah,
So whether it's a behavior because of a diagnosis, or if it's just behavior because it's a learned strategy,
yeah,
it's that part is irrelevant. It's what's the experience, and are you experiencing this too? So being able to validate and normalize those things. And I find that for some, whether they want to introduce, because there's a lot of controversy in terms of, like, sharing with your child what their
yep,
diagnoses are and things like that, and that's a whole other podcast.
yeah,
But I think the idea of normalizing the behavior and the experience,
yeah,
is can provide so much relief for a child, as well as parents too. When you're like, I don't know why my kid keeps X, Y, and Z, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's because
yeah.
the ADHD and the way that the brain is wired, and so you're like, oh, okay, so now I don't have to discipline or punish my child for this behavior.
No,
Now I know that this is a behavior that needs coaching and needs
yeah,
a new strategy
yeah,
instead, right?
yeah,
So, I remember many years ago, I was teaching grade two at a different school than the one that Owen was at. And there was a child that, we were wondering whether there was some ADHD there. And I was so grateful. The parents, were receptive and went ahead with, investigating that. And he did end up getting a diagnosis of
mhm,
ADHD. And the mom of that child decided to tell her child that this
yeah,
is what it is, and was able to explain it. And I remember her sharing the relief that her child felt,
yeah,
knowing that being driven by a motor and always feeling like he's driving a race car,
Yeah.
is because of the way his brain is wired,
Yeah.
and that it's perfectly normal, and that so many other people experience the same things.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, I don't have to be ashamed of that behavior. I don't have to be worried about getting in trouble for that behavior or other things, right? It's like it's knowing, right?
Right.
It's knowing yourself. There's a relief to being having your experience validated and normalized, right?
Yeah, and I don't think, and I mean, not that I want to speak for O, but I don't think he has ever felt ashamed per se. I know there's things he gets frustrated with, like, the
Mhm.
DCD, but at the same time, he doesn't, it's not that he sort of hides from it. And even when I was explaining autism to him, the way that I described it of that umbrella analogy where everybody's got an umbrella and it's everybody's umbrella looks different. These are your unique traits. This is how your brain is wired. And that doesn't make your umbrella any less valid than anybody else's.
Mhm.
But I'm not going to use a big scary word like autism, right?
Mhm.
That's not what, and I think that I think those kind of labels and stuff, and because we've got a deficits based medical model, it contributes to those stereotypes and everything else, as opposed to like you've said before, that strengths based way of looking at something. And there can be for a lot of people some really good and very cool things that can come out of it. My ability to sit there and hyper focus on something is fantastic. The fact the time blindness sucks. Not realizing sort of where you are, and it takes a heck of a lot of effort to realize those things. But I don't think he has ever felt the shame, and I don't ever want him to. I just want him to know what his strengths are, where his gaps may be, or what needs to be strengthened, and just working on there. Because when you start to see it like that, you're not saying that you're weak, right?
Mhm.
It's not strong versus weak. It's nothing to do with that, which I
Mhm.
think is where our society very much is in whether it's marketing products. This will get you all the whatever in the world, just get this product. And eh, you go to Yale and you're supposed to get the smartest kids ever. No, it's not that at all.
Mhm.
It's, you're the ones who can take those things apart and understand how their brain works and understand where their gaps and strengths are and what's natural to them. I think that's what you want to drive somebody. And I think that's certainly one of the important things you want for any kid growing up as they get older into an adult. Because I know I look at things now and it's like, I need to get to this point, but I'm at this point. Okay. What do I need to do this? And, whether it's realistic or not is a whole other thing.
I think
Um,
we get scared of labels a lot, and
Very much.
um I feel like that often is a big barrier for parents being open to um further
Yeah.
testing or assessments that would help kind of figure out some behaviors and things like that. That's often what we get. Well, I don't want my child labeled as ADHD and all that. And it's like, okay, but what you need to understand is that your child getting that diagnosis. Okay, so ADHD, I'll just use just because.
Sure.
Um, doesn't do anything within the school system. Like they don't get any kind of designation that comes with that. They don't get funding, they don't get EA time,
No.
nothing.
No.
But it is put obviously in their file so that the next teacher
Yeah.
who gets that child knows that this is something neurodivergent going on, and that I am prepared to strategize and to have these certain things in place
Yeah.
so that that child can succeed in class
Yeah.
and reach that full potential and not just cruise on status quo autopilot. It's about awareness so that your teaching style and your strategies for assessment and behavior management and all those things can be tailored to who's in front of you.
Yeah.
And, and even like if we were to go as far as getting an autism diagnosis, which does change,
Yeah. You actually
things
do get
in
funding for it.
the
Yeah.
system, right? Explaining that having your child, stamped on the forehead with autism in the
Yeah.
school system isn't about having a stamp on their forehead so everyone can go autism, autism, autism. It's about going, okay, this is what we've got going on here. These are the supports required so this child can reach their potential.
Yeah.
And great, now that we have this, we can actually receive funding for these extra supports. We can make sure that that child is getting the EA support that they deserve, and that they need. And so it's not about that stamp so that that child can walk around with it on their forehead every day. It's so that the system can do what it needs to do
Yeah.
in order to support that child. So having parents reframe labels is often one of the first steps to having a willingness to be able to explore further assessments and outside agencies for support.
Well, and it's the thing about you're saying about, the system does what it needs to do. When I was in grade 2, I was held back in grade 3 a year. And this year was very important for me because Owen's going to grade 4. And it means the world for me because I asked my parents about this, and basically you know, trying to remember everything from youth is really impossible. I always thought that I struggled in certain areas or whatnot, but I said, why was I held back? And they said, I know they didn't have a good relationship with the principal at the time, which I know was one reason. But the other reason was that I quote unquote wasn't mature enough, and I was just like, I'm a 9-year-old kid in grade 3. You want me to be mature?
Mhm.
What in what, like, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah.
And so that process of being held back, and then for me, it's like I went from a public school to a private school, and it was just like, no, the experience, like the systems, I mean, are totally different, but not knowing and not having those and not having that sort of definitive answer of what was going on. And I mean, granted, this was back in 85. So this is a long, ridiculous time ago. The knowledge is not what it is now. Would I have wanted the intervention? I don't know. It's really hard to say.
Mhm.
Um, it might have been put the kid on medication and then go from there, and who knows where I would have ended up. But to sort of go through that experience, and now my son, and for that matter my daughter, has the opposite of it, and that pushing forth and that advocating, it's just funny enough, I'm not exactly mad at my parents about it. It's more like, I don't know, and they've sort of said the same thing, is I don't think that they necessarily would have known what to do. Go out and find a tutor,
Mhm.
basically, because there's something wrong with Mark. And that was the mentality back then.
Mhm.
And that's not the mentality now, right?
Mhm.
There's nothing wrong. I just think different. And so does O, for that matter, or so does Kenzie or you or whoever else. Um, what do you think How do you think parents can do you think there's an effective way for parents to approach a teacher and say, "Hey, we have concerns, and, here's what we see," and what kind of information helps?
Honestly, all information is important. I think that starting the conversations early
Mm,
is key. Um, you know, Early intervention for anything, whether it's academic, behavioral, emotional, mental health, all of it. Early intervention is literally the key to everything.
mhm,
So if you are, keeping observations about your child, to yourself and not sharing those things with the classroom teacher who's spending a lot of time with that child, you're hindering the process of kind of gearing up the teacher, the EAs, whoever the supports are in the school, from being able to make meaningful observations necessarily, or to be able to make sense of certain observations. So if, 9 times out of 10, you won't share an observation about your child, but your teacher, if they're paying attention, is noticing probably the same thing, right? And is writing it down, but doesn't know the background, doesn't know what's underneath that behavior. So if you share your information about your child because you know your child best, and now the teacher is observing this same behavior they were before, but with the lens of what they now know from you, it's way more powerful, right? There's so much more power that goes into being able to support a child when you know about them, right? So, like for me, every single year in the classroom, I always send out, the in a million words or less, document to parents where they can share anything about their child. What they
I remember it.
There's tons of questions that can guide. If you don't know, but there are other parents, yourself included, who know exactly what to say and need to just say it all. I read every single one of those because not only does it help me at the beginning of the year find out commonalities, or things that a student enjoys that I can use to build relationship with. Oh, I know that so and so really is obsessed with Pokemon. Okay, well I can talk about Pokemon then, and now we're building rapport, and now I have a relationship with that child simply because that parent shared that. Or I know that a parent has shared a custody arrangement between mom and dad, and I know that it's 1 week on, 1 week off. And when I notice behaviors and anxiety start to flare before transition day, okay, that context is so helpful. So now I can help with the front loading to get that child regulated and emotionally ready for the transition to the next parent. And now, right? And it provides everything, right? And allows for an understanding. Not only that, but it also, if I am reading something that a parent has written about their child, I can also start to foster friendships, right? So and so loves Pokemon. Oh, well, mom mentioned that so and so also loves Pokemon, and now I can help, facilitate a conversation. You can gauge a lot about how parents feel and view their child by what they're willing to share with you too. So I will know right away, based on just that simple document, who I need to, maybe, what's the word I'm trying to say? I might need to be more cautious of, in terms of sharing observations. Or I know that, okay, for instance, that you are, and I say this with so much love, an oversharer, right? That you were
I am.
willing to write me pages in an email, which is not a bad thing. For me, that was not a bad thing. But in doing that, it tells me about who you are, right? And so I go, okay, these are all things that are helpful when you build context around the child, and you can then use that information to build supports.
Well, and I mean, one of the other things, and so I can define, because I know you used front loading. Front loading is when, just because it's a term not everybody might be familiar with, it's when you're giving a child, or giving anybody for that matter, you're saying what's going to happen next. And you can go as many tasks ahead as you need to go for it. I'm going to go get myself a glass of water, and then we're going to go do science class, and then we're going to go do this. And I mean, Owen thrives off of that in his case. I think what's very interesting about what you're saying from the parent point of view and the oversharing side of it is, and this was the perspective that I came from, when I wrote that long message of, what of information and things that we were, and I wasn't too sure on what to write. The other reason that I did it was because, I did it because I was concerned. We were both concerned. But number two, we wanted to make sure that it was documented. And like I have said ad nauseum in every single episode, it's really about, you got to document, because if I said something on, I don't know, May, or what is it, September 25th of 2019, and you're going for an autism diagnosis or whatever diagnosis, later, a couple years later on, oh, I told Miss Madison about this thing, and this is documented down, and there's something here for this. And then you're like, oh, thank God I did overshare. Thank God I did say what I had to say, because it isn't so much about the school preventing it per se, or something along those lines. It's really about documenting what you're noticing, what you're seeing, and you can tie it back to something. And that's, I think, a big, big deal.
It is a big deal. And I think when you get to the step of meeting with specialists in outside agencies like Sunny Hill, they're going to want to know, when did this behavior begin? What did you start noticing? And if you can say, okay, that behavior goes all the way back to when they were a toddler or when they were in preschool,
Yeah.
it's a lot easier for that team to then say, okay, so this is the developmental framework that they were working in, age wise. Okay, we normally see this behavior start here,
Yeah.
instead. And so now, again, you've given context to the development of your child, how their brain works, when certain behaviors began, and just overall wonders that you had about your child and their behavior and their regulation skills or whatnot, right? So when
Yeah.
you get that team of experts involved, they're going to want to know that stuff. And so if you document it and you share it, just like you said, with teachers and so on, then yes, you can give yourself credit. You can go back and say, yes, I did see that
Yeah.
behavior. I did mention that behavior, and then we tried the strategy and it didn't work. Or we tried the strategy and it was really successful. So then I
Yeah.
shared that with the teacher and we started using that. Or, like, it just being able
Well,
to
and that's
document.
what, and I remember specifically, that's what you and I were doing, and Siobhan too. It's like, if he gets, I remember saying about the running, if he gets really mad or upset,
Mhm.
he may need to go for a run outside, and he just might need to just move out of somewhere else. Because we had seen we'd seen the whole range of everything from him in terms of how he deals with something that's bad.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that, those kind of things could be not life-saving. I don't know if that's a little too much of an overstatement, but I think it might be the right word, because the child goes back home, they've got that aspect of their day to consider, and they have to unload, and they have to, at home, they don't really have to hide or anything like that. They'll just unleash for the most part.
Mhm.
And
You
that's a lot of it's a lot of stuff that's, what's the word? That's a lot that can be built up for a kid over a day. A lot.
Absolutely. And the opposite can be true, where school ends up becoming the
Oh, yes.
same,
Yeah.
right? So
And they're
then you're
perfectly fine at
noticing,
home.
and they're perfectly fine at home. And so then you have that to, wonder about as well. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Here's a bit of a, because you mentioned early intervention, which I absolutely love. Because you and I mean, we're on the same page as far as that goes. But when you have things like, because right now there's a push that, like I look at what Dyslexia BC wants to do and get the early the early interventions in for school, and I'm all for it. Um, you know, eh, where is there a way to help support that process? I guess is maybe the
As,
word I'm looking for. I'm
as
not sure.
a
I'm not sure if I'm
parent
asking the right
or teacher.
question there. Yeah, like how can a teacher sort of, I guess, promote that side of it as well?
Well, I think with any circumstance,
Mm,
if the parents aren't willing, then there's only so much we can do.
yeah,
So we do not have the power to diagnose. We do
no,
not have the power to share information, with doctors or counselors or anything like that, unless you've filled out consent forms, all sorts of things, right? So the parent really is that linchpin to things taking off or not.
Yeah.
So early intervention is great, but we also have to remember, okay, how early is early intervention? Well, if it's as early as it should be, it's before they're in the public school system.
Yeah.
So that all falls on parents, right?
Yep.
To research and to understand and to get, their doctors on board and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, but in terms of once they're within the school system, um, you know, teachers overall are going to be, or should be using what we call universal design.
Yeah.
So, universal design is the idea that the strategies that I'm choosing to teach, to behavior manage, to assess are meeting the needs of 99% of my students, whether they're neurodiverse or not. So, if, for instance, having a visual schedule for everyone in the class
Hmm.
is helpful for everyone. But it also is super detrimental to that child with autism or anxiety, let's say, that needs to know what's happening throughout the day and when it's happening.
Yeah.
So that's a good example. So using universal design is kind of the benchmark for how teachers are teaching, generally meets most needs. That's not always the case,
Yeah.
but that's the hope, right?
Yeah.
So early intervention then becomes what kind of additional supports can we get in place for that child?
Yeah.
So this is when we often will have, those parent meetings where we're saying, this is what we're noticing. Tell me more about this. And then letting the parent know that you will be referring their child to what we call school-based team. And so there's a
Hmm.
documentation process that happens for the classroom teacher, and they have to go through all of these steps before school-based team meetings will even be set. So when I say school-based team, I'm talking about classroom teachers, LST, IST, speech and language, counselors that are involved, and administration. So
Yeah.
it's basically all of the external, what we call non-enrolling positions within a school setting, outside of just the classroom teacher. So the classroom teacher, part of the process for even just getting a referral into school-based team to be evaluated, we have to have parent meetings. We have to read the child's file from previous years to see what interventions were put in place, what supports were there, if there was any behavior documentation, and so on. We have to do our research and our due diligence as professionals to find out as much as we can about that child
Yeah.
before we can even put the paperwork in to have school-based team then look at all of it too.
Yeah.
So, where the public school system falls very short on early intervention is just how underfunded and the crisis of not having enough specialist teachers and early intervention people even available. So, sure, we offer speech and language pathologists, but that one individual is stretched
Oh,
between 5 schools and
yes.
only has one service day at your child's school per week, and they have a caseload of 200 students just at that one site who need servicing.
Yeah.
So you're
Yeah.
lucky if your child is able to access that service once a month.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so then we fall incredibly short.
Yeah.
So getting if you can, if you have benefits and access to outside agencies or private support, even though those wait lists are also usually quite
They're horrible.
extensive too,
Yeah.
right? And there's so many systemic issues that cause these barriers, but yeah, so early intervention is key. However, there's a lot of barriers around actually having it happen
Yeah.
once the child is within the school system.
Well, and it was funny because in the notes that you and I made for talking about this, like the question that you wrote down, thinking about your experience, what barriers existed for
Mm,
you slash your child as you navigated the public school system.
mm,
That was certainly one of them. And I remember meeting with the SPT, which is just the acronym for school-based team.
mm,
And I, we couldn't afford to go private. Again, the wait list is ridiculously long, and especially with what happened with us at Sunny Hill, like, come on.
mm,
The And God knows we didn't want to have a repeat of what happened when he was 4 years old. but then trying to get things like a psych ed, oh, we'll put him on the wait list, and then hearing from one of the psychologists that, they could do an autism assessment, but he's way down on the priority list, and realizing that the only thing on the priority list is actually the kids who are really aggressive. Like, no. And how many psych eds does the school district do a year? I got quoted, and I will not say who, but they quoted me 4. I've heard some districts do 2. And I'm like, this is pathetic. This is
I would dispute that, because I've known certain school sites that I've worked at that that have several 8, 9, 10 psych eds done in a school year. It doesn't seem like much, but again, when the only person who could administer a psych ed is the district psychologist who's serving the entire district, the wait lists are insane, right?
Yeah, they are.
And it's also a multi-day process. So there's that too.
Yeah. And that's, those are the barriers that I found, that getting to like the things that you had set up, or getting to the principal or whoever the LST was, or IST, or any of those, that piece isn't so difficult. But trying to trigger a mechanism that's going to get your kid more support, that is where it's really, I find, that's where I think the rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
And that is what makes it really tough. And there was a meeting I was in yesterday with a government official, and they had asked the group for, solutions and such. And the way that they came up with this, the way that they were looking for solutions from all these advocates that were in this meeting, it was almost like, here's a solution. Oh, okay, thank you very much. But when it came to, I guess the word would be, maybe implementing it or seeing what the realistic side of that might be. Oh, we don't like that solution. Well, what do you want then? Like, that is the frustrating piece, that bureaucracy gets in the way of that. And it shouldn't take 4 years to get a dyslexia test or a psych ed or anything like that. It shouldn't do that. And it shouldn't, if somebody's got extended benefits and they're able to afford it, I'm very happy for them. I truly, honestly am. Some families like us, we're not able to afford that. And that's a big deal. We didn't find a barrier in terms of the attitude of things, the stereotypes and stuff, but more in just trying to get the answers that we wanted more than anything else.
So I wanted to touch on what you were talking about around the bureaucracy and the systemic kind of barriers and shortcomings that kind of make the process for diagnosis and early intervention troublesome. And obviously I need to be, careful about kind of how I phrase, this next answer, I guess, to one of the questions around kind of shortcomings and things like that, because I really do believe in the public school system, and I've seen year after year after year, dedicated staff working to support students, even with all of these systemic shortcomings that hinder our process. But I will say that the kind of the number one barrier up against really anybody, whether it's a family with a neurodivergent child or not, is just the consistent underfunding of the public education system, right? So, people, there's a cliche around, teachers begging for more money for the public school system, right? And that's, they've been crying for that for years. And, the government just pushed 1 point whatever million into this school district, and it's distorted. It is so incredibly distorted.
Yeah.
If we think of even just what the salary of one speech and language pathologist would be, and you want that, one person to service 2,000 children across multiple school sites, right? Like, it just, I don't think people realize that, you ultimately you put money where you care about things, right? So you put time, you put effort, you put money where you care. And so, I'm not saying that the government doesn't care per se, but what I am saying is that I don't think that they recognize, and therefore how it's portrayed to the media, how it's portrayed to the people that are not in the system working it with these shortcomings and underfunding,
Yeah.
that it's framed in a way that makes the public education system look greedy, look ungrateful per se. But I don't think that there's an understanding truly of where funding goes and
No.
how it's allocated. And so, if we're up against those things already, just underfunding, that has a direct effect on support hours that EAs give and jobs that are posted. Often districts will, get so many designations that generate X amount of funding. And instead of that going directly to your child, it's allocated to the school as a whole.
Yep.
So then the administration and the IST teams and LST teams, that whole school-based team then goes, okay, whose highest needs, and reallocates the hours and the funding that your child brought in. And it's not necessarily going to them. Right. So as a parent going, okay, we've gone through this whole process, years of process to get
Yeah.
this diagnosis, to get this designation within the public school system. What do you mean my child does not have an EA from
Yeah.
bell to bell? What do you mean they're just getting support in the mornings?
Yep.
Right? So there's so many pieces and so many moving pieces. And again, I will say that the staff within the school does everything they can to make
Yeah.
do with what we're given, but we're given scraps at the end of the day. You know what I mean?
Well,
So
and I mean, I think the other thing too is that, I mean, that's a pretty good explanation in terms of, the things that, do happen and should happen. But the schools and the districts don't exactly publicize where the money goes or what they don't, that's not talked about.
no.
The management of it per se. I also find that, and again, in the meeting that I had yesterday, where with the government official, just the attitude that I get, and I mean, this is not just a yesterday thing. This is a in general thing. Is we've put in X amount of millions of dollars.
Mm.
Fantastic. It gets a "What have you done for me lately?" attitude, which
Mhm.
is not the case. And it's also, I think, a very defensive thing. We're going to make an investment of 22 million in this, and it's going to bring us this and this and this. Okay, cool. That's awesome. Way to go. Is this going to solve this problem? This problem? No. Oh, okay. Yeah, I understand that we have to expand, but we still have this problem over here. What are we doing?
Yes, and that brings me like almost directly to the second major issue that the public school system is up against, which is basically the disconnect
Yeah.
between the network of policymakers and the ones who are actually on the ground running
Yep.
school. Right. So what I like to say is that, the policymakers and the people that are in charge of making decisions about financial allocations, about new programs, about hiring, all of that stuff, educational policy in general, they are stuck with what I like to call the balcony view. Right. So they're looking, at things a very generalized sense, right? Going, okay, this program should hypothetically be funded by this 20 million that we're investing.
Yeah.
Okay, but when we actually look at how it's going to run on the dance floor, if you will, with the people who are actually working the dance floor, doing the movements,
Mhm.
working with what the balcony viewers are viewing, but they're actually in it, going, okay, so this 20 million that you're saying is going to be allocated to this program, which is, built to support our neurodiverse learners. But when you bring it down in actuality, it goes, okay, this was enough money to hire a manager and only 2 workers that need to run a program within this ratio for safety reasons. And so they can only run it with this funding. If you want this program to last for 4 years, they can only run it once a week or once a month. Right. So when you actually break down the numbers, it's all so skewed, right? And that idea of what have you done for me lately? And it's like, aren't children at the very foundation of what we should be investing in and building up, right? Like if
and the
children are
prevention
becoming adults and we're supposed to be building citizens of the world,
Yeah.
do you think that that's where we should be investing, right? Like,
and not only that, I mean, taking it a step further, you look at what, I mean, again, I'll just pick on dyslexia, just because it's on the front of my mind when I think about it. But treating, getting ahead of dyslexia at preschool or kindergarten is going to save that person's life in, when they get into high school or after, if they even make it through high school. And that's a big, big, big deal, because people that do drop out that are dyslexic, they, a lot of them will suffer, and they'll end up on the street. They'll end up on social assistance because, they can't read that. They can't, they didn't have anybody advocating for that change, or the things are how they are now. And, you find a good teacher like you, and, maybe somebody will get lucky.
Well, and I think, it's reading is about it's equity.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's the license to be successful in the world. And so it makes it so complicated to do early intervention when we don't have the tools to do early intervention. Right. So it's all, there's so much at work that makes the system challenging. And, people would think, oh, well, that's a very grandiose statement to say that a child with dyslexia will end up on the streets. Well, it's not, though. That's the thing, because it's access to the world. Being able to read and write is access to the world. It's access to information. Right. And so there are a ton of statistics around, that basically they say that by the end of grade 3, if a child is not reading at what is established at grade level expectations, that their rate of success just goes down by such a significant amount. And I can't quote the numbers exactly because I can't remember them, but the studies, show that basically by that end of grade 3, that is the dictating point of success for a child's academics and dropout rates in high school and all of those things. So what you speak of is so real, and not some false narrative or some victimhood mentality that, oh, well, if we don't support this child, he's going to be homeless and on the street. No, it's a very real possibility, because reading and writing is access, right? So if we're not providing access, then yes, statistically saying that child is up against so much more. And by the end of grade 3. So if a child is not reading or writing within that grade level expectation by then, that already dictates their success as a 17-year-old in grade 12 if they make it that far.
Yeah.
Right?
And maybe that needs to be broken down a bit more, because you're saying, they're not able to read by grade 3, but read, I think, at some level, or write at some level. It's not that anybody's going to be fully proficient at reading or writing by grade 3. Like, no.
And that's why I say, according to grade level expectations, right?
Yeah.
So however the government has coined that success marker, that's what they use to determine.
Let's close things out. And for you, I want you to speak to the teachers that are out there that are possibly listening, and give 3 to 5 tips in terms of approaching a parent and saying, or even just opening up a conversation. And I will happily give 3 to 5 tips on the parent side of things to say, Here's what you can do, to get empowered and to figure out, what the next step is, because the parent is really in the driver's seat more than anything, right? The pressure and the point is, I think, is on us to sit there and go and ask, maybe being able to ask the right questions.
Mhm.
But yeah, I can go first, or you can go first.
You go ahead, and then I
Cool.
can jump in.
Cool. I think for me, I think there's one without question is ask questions. If you see something odd, ask. And don't worry if you're not, don't worry if you think you're asking the question the wrong way, just ask the question,
Mhm.
right? And I think it's perfectly fine to admit that you don't know what's going on. You think something's odd or out of place or what have you, or they should be at a certain level.
Mhm.
Why do it? Just ask it whatever way. I find very few people will truly actually even get offended by it. Um, use your child's voice as much as you can. There's
Mhm.
another one, and have them be the ones to say, "I don't understand this. I just don't know why." Um, I think for I think for the research side of it, I had to think about this. The I think as a parent, we want to be educated, we want to learn all these things, but there's a lot of bad stuff out there and a lot of
Huh?
crap.
Mhm.
And so, you know what? It's hard for me to sit there and say be aware of the bad authors, but
Mhm.
like I would sit there and I would not listen to a single thing like Gabor Matt has got to say. Like the dude, I want to see this guy go away. This whole thing that he's got going with ADHD is ridiculous. Anyways, I think just knowing where those things are, or for that matter, like you and I talked about offline, like the ABA therapy and how damaging that can be to a student, and to sit there and quote unquote hide the undesirable traits or features that somebody may have. No, so it makes you unique.
Mhm.
It could very well be a strength. Yeah, educating yourself about that, I think, it's critical, because a lot of people don't know. They don't know these things.
Mhm.
Um, I think if you join a Facebook group, that's pretty smart. But again, take everything with that grain of salt, and you want to know, what should you look for?
Mhm.
What are the things to avoid? Um, those are the kind of things, especially when you have your suspicions. And I would say open a relationship with a teacher and have that open, candid conversation and come at that place from humble inquiry, I think,
Mhm. Mm.
and be open to, maybe I'm missing something, maybe I'm not. I just see something that's wrong, and just try to figure out the answer, that piece. And I know a lot of people don't have a family doctor, but again, there's another one that I'd love to say trust talking to your family doctor, but I've been seeing more and more stories about, no, that's not the greatest idea either. Um, it's, you want to be able to trust them, but it's really hard in the neurodiverse world. So find yourself a doctor or pediatrician that you know and can trust, and you can bounce something off of that fits with your ideals. And even if you get maybe lucky part of the way with that, be willing to take that information in and just understand, you can't just say I don't agree with it. Why don't you agree with it? What are the points that you disagree on? Make it mechanical and a process more than anything else. That's what I would say. And I think the most important one is do it all with kindness.
Mhm.
Yeah, those are my more than 5 tips.
I love it, and I could advocate for the parent side too as a mom.
Yeah,
But I love what you said about humble inquiry. I think
yeah,
that's a really eloquent way of saying that. I would say that kind of my short and concise uh, advice, I guess, to teachers out there is to be curious. So always keeping that, curiosity peaked, because as soon as you think you know all the answers, or you think that that this behavior it fits exactly with this profile,
Mhm.
and you close the door on other options, you're limiting what could be, right, what could be discovered. And so remaining curious about behaviors, remaining curious about points of view that you hear from parents, if they agree or disagree with you, being curious about what's unfolding in front of you. um, so that would be my first thing. My second kind of piece of advice for teachers would be, embrace gentleness.
Mhm.
I think that sometimes, especially when we're dealing with the children of the world, which generally are a vulnerable population, there can be an abrasiveness, or a perceived power dynamic that doesn't need to be there
Yeah.
when you are having conversations with parents. If parents are asking questions about your methods, your belief system, your pedagogy, the way that you physically lay out your classroom, rather than being offended by that, be confident in why.
Yeah.
And if you don't know why you set up something the way that it is, or that you do a certain behavior management process that you do, investigate, be curious, go back to that, right? Because sometimes, especially early career teachers, they go off what they've been modeled in their practicums, or what they see on Pinterest, or Facebook or TikTok or whatever. And so they actually have no conception of their own pedagogy around why they chose that. They just thought it looked fun, or they saw someone else do it, but they never actually questioned, is
Mhm.
this functional, or does this match my belief system and the way that I want to teach in my classroom? So not only gentleness with how you approach the conversation with parents, because you're talking about their child who they love and want to
Yep.
protect, but also gentleness with yourself to go, I might not know all the answers. I might need to do some reflection to be able to get back to you about why I do that. Yeah, so just that gentleness, I think, is important. And then I would say number 3 would be to seek help, and don't be afraid to seek help. So if
Mm.
you don't know an answer, if you have never seen this behavior before, if you have tried all of the different tools in your belt, to try and help with certain behaviors that you're seeing from a child, and it's not working, go get help. It's so important. We are a network of experts. And
Mhm.
so there are people who can help you all around you. The classroom teacher next door might be able to think outside the box, because you're so invested in it, and you can't see outside of it anymore. Ask LST, ask IST, ask administration, get a mentor through the district's mentorship programs. Like, there's don't be afraid to seek help, and to say, yeah, I don't actually know about this. I want to find out more. Is this
Yeah.
behavior connected to what we know about ADHD? Is this behavior connected to what we know about autism? Oh, it's not. Interesting. I wonder what else, like
Yeah.
those kinds of things. So seeking help, being gentle, being curious. And the last one I would say is just don't give up. So if you are grinding against barriers, whether it's parental barriers that you have parents in denial, or parents who are abrasive or not very accepting of what you have to say, and things like that, um, that should not change how you support that child during your time. And there is a certain amount that teachers need to let go of impact and their reach, that at the end of the day, when that bell rings, the reach is no longer there. So what can you do within your capacity to support that child and help them reach their potential, even if you are grinding against barriers,
Yeah.
staying the course with it? That's kind of what I would offer.
Cool.
Yeah.
I think my last one, if I was a teacher, I would always say, um, seek the student's voice
Hmm.
as much as you can. And there's a story behind that. Actually, the reason I say that, and it was a Pro D Day thing I attended, um, and it was a disability advocate, who I will not name, but this person's apparently well known. I'd never heard of them, but I'm just one guy. And they were talking about quote unquote inclusive ways to get kids that had disabilities engaged in the classroom, and everything that came out of her mouth was the complete opposite.
Mm.
And it was just like, oh God, no. So I
Interesting.
did. I made a little point of saying this to the HR department. It was because I was mortified after I heard everything, and I stuck around to the very end of it. And it's just like, you did not even ask the student if they were okay with, I don't know, everybody dressing up in pajamas because they think they're a superhero,
Mm.
dude. Anyways, um, thank you, Melissa, for coming on the
You're
show.
welcome. Thank you for having me.
And let's get some fun stuff.
Okay.
Okay, favorite day of the week.
Oh, Wednesday.
Why Wednesday?
It's hopeful.
It's helpful?
Hopeful.
Oh, hopeful. What do you mean by hope? But what do you mean by hopeful?
So like Monday is the grind. Tuesday you're exhausted and you have to keep going. Wednesday you're
Okay.
like, okay, I'm over the hump. Like we're sailing towards the weekend, and like there's
Um,
usually less meetings after Wednesday. There's more like
yeah,
fun activities planned, less stressful a Wednesday. What about you?
now I get it. For me, it's funny enough, it's actually Mondays.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll Monday is the day that I would have when I'll take the kids to school or whatnot. It's the day that I have everything in the fridge. The fridge is fully stocked. Everything is cut and done, and I just sit there and just feel it's. I don't know if it's a pride thing or whatnot, but the kids are all taken care of. Siobhan's taken care of, and that's part of the reason for it. And the other part is just that optimist in me, where I'm like, I've got the whole week to do something pretty killer. So
I love
I
that.
have I have no idea what it is, but that's usually, seeing that full fridge makes me happy. So, um, so this one's going to be interesting.
Okay.
So we're going to play what's the first thing that comes to your mind? And I'm not going to tell you if it's negative or positive. I'm just got
Okay.
4 phrases.
Okay.
They could even be a single word.
Okay.
And first thing that comes to your mind, you can elaborate if you want.
Okay.
Making space.
So what the first thing I think of?
Hmm,
Um, I think of holding space.
cool. Like this. And if anybody hears any clacking, it's because I was actually typing. I've been typing notes this whole time.
I have a notepad too, the quiet pencil.
Yeah. Okay, next one. You are so resilient.
Ugh. That's my one word response. I think I will elaborate on that one, and I only have a negative connotation to that
Same, yeah.
phrase, because of my own journey in life. Um, I think that often saying to a child that they're resilient,
Yeah,
is a way to negate their experience.
yeah.
Children shouldn't have to be resilient.
No,
That should not be a word used to describe a child.
yeah,
Right? It just means that they've hidden and they've become complacent or are in some trauma response to appeal to the masses and what the norm should be.
yep, yeah, 100%. 100%. As I like to say, it should not it means taking crap well.
Yes.
That's not,
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of that at all. Um, advocate.
I just think of adults, like pairing adults. So teachers and parents being advocates.
Hmm,
Yeah.
right? Accommodations/adaptations versus tools.
Hmm. Um, gosh, my word for that is tricky. It's tricky. Yeah, I think depending on how you're using it,
Yeah.
um, yeah, and it falls under the universal design mind frame for me. And uh, the biggest difference between the two, I feel like, is who drives it. So, like, tools are child centered. So, what tools they have, what they choose to use, there's choice
Mhm.
in that. Whereas I feel like the idea of adaptations and modifications are adult driven. What are we putting into place, and when do we put them into place
Ah,
for a child? That's my
interesting.
Yeah, whereas like a child who has a tool belt that's been fully stocked with strategies from
Mhm.
parents and teachers over the years,
Yeah.
there's autonomy there. There's choice where they can be like, this tool is going to work for me right now, and this is a tried and true tool. Whereas a teacher or a specialist coming in and saying, this is the modification that we're making to this activity so that your child can participate.
Yeah.
It's very, yeah, adult driven. Yeah, less autonomy.
The it's I like asking that one because I always get curious as to where people lie with that. The maybe I shouldn't do the tell on this because I should just leave it to see where people sort of done it. But I know I've talked about it before with in an episode. But the w- I know where the language comes from, which comes from the Human Rights Charter, and they use accommodations slash adaptations. But I don't. I'm not a fan of it because to me it says you're adapting something that should be considered a standard air quotes or normal air quotes, and so we're making an adaptation for such and such, whether it's a child or adult.
Mhm.
And that is a that runs into a problem because it's not that it should be seen as doing something differently should not be seen less as doing it another way differently.
Mhm.
Just shouldn't. So I sit there and I look at tool. I just like for me it's tools. It's gender neutral. It's neutral in general, and it's really getting to the point of you have a different way of doing something, and
Well,
I
I
think
think the language
that's
is very ableist, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
it's this idea that we're accommodating
yeah,
your special need
exactly.
into
Yeah,
our regular mainstream norm,
yeah,
as opposed to we all have these tools and we pick which ones we use based
yeah,
on the situation.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. No, 100%. And it's, I know when I talk to staff and I sort of hear those words and I hear those words or teachers or whatnot, I always try to make sure that, we're using, I try to stick with the word tools as much as I possibly can. And I usually sort of lead with that. It's like, what tools are at our disposal? What can we do with it? A bit more mechanical too, so it's kind of easy. Once you kind of suck the emotion out of things and you make it mechanical, it's like, you know what? Or it's two things. My child doesn't have such and such tool, but they're being denied it. So it's like, all right, that makes me angry. Yes. So there's two things. Not only are you angry about it, but your child doesn't have the thing.
Mhm.
And I think what we'll do, especially parents, will just sit there and combine and mush the two and make it into one. Um, and sometimes, yeah, I think that sometimes you got to be able to separate them.
Yes, and I think that we have to remember too that um, you know there will naturally be emotionality that comes with parenting and the way we look and view our children and things like that, right? Because we are deeply connected to them. But there is a certain objectiveness that can be helpful, especially when you're on a journey to a diagnosis.
Yeah.
Um, because at the end of the day, we need to remember that children will perform well when they can,
Yeah.
right? Children never choose the tantrum,
Yeah.
right?
No,
It's, oh, they are dysregulated because they do not have a fully grown regulation system yet, right? So
pretty much.
it's what tools are missing, what
Yeah.
strategy is missing, What's the antecedent? What's the trigger point?
Yeah.
And how do we support that? How do we build that tool? Um, so
Yeah.
remaining, yeah, just a step back from it sometimes can be really helpful.
Cool. I like that.
Mm, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And how can people get in touch with you if they wanted to, or if
Well,
they have questions?
yeah. So you can always email my school district email. So it's Madison_M at surreyschools.ca. That's always a way to get a hold of me. And yeah, I'll respond any way that I can to be helpful. And just no hate mail, okay?
No, better not be any, or else you get an answer from me. You do not touch
No,
Melissa.
I'm open to all feedback. So I love to have conversations, even with opposing views. So yeah, you can absolutely contact me on my school district email.
And I would love to give you the last word and close this out if there's anything else you want to say.
Gosh, oh, that's a lot of pressure. Um, just keep advocating, and keep being there for your kids. You are you are the one who can make things happen, and your voice is important as they're learning to use theirs. So,
That's
yeah.
awesome. Thank you very much.
You're so welcome.
Okay. Bye,
Okay.
everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for listening to our show.
One of the things that we love about Owen is how literal he is. There was a joke that we used to say to him that he would never understand. He does now, so he catches it. But we would tell him, "Hey, Owen, can you hold your horses?" And then he'd go, "I don't have any horses, Dad." Now when we try to tell him this joke, he just catches us and he's like, "That doesn't work on me anymore." If you're hearing this message, you've reached the end of the episode, and for that, I want to say thank you. I hope you have enjoyed what you've heard and are walking away with newfound knowledge.
We are the ADHD Family.
See you soon for a new episode. I have 3 things to ask of you. Number 1, if you have any comments, questions, or guest ideas, please leave a comment on the Facebook page. Number 2, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps people find us. And number 3, if you want to be a guest on the show or know someone who would make a great guest, contact me through our Facebook page. This podcast is open to everyone. You don't need to be an expert, just passionate and want to see change. The opinions expressed by the host and guest are not associated with any employer or organization unless otherwise stated. Any medical information on this site and podcast is provided as an information resource only and is not to be used or relied on for any diagnostic or treatment purposes. This information does not create any patient-physician relationship and should not be used as a substitute for a professional diagnosis and treatment. Please consult your healthcare provider before making any healthcare decisions or guidance about a specific medical condition. The show, host, and its guests expressly disclaim responsibility and shall have no liability for any damages, loss, injury, or liability whatsoever suffered as a result of your reliance on the information contained in this site or show. By visiting this site and listening to this show, you agree to the terms and conditions, which may from time to time change or be supplemented by the show host.